Where is Jaissle's Newcastle going to finish this season? Relegated, apparently, according to some. I don't think so, but what is a realistic expectation for this season? Now, I've been somewhat reluctant to make this video because we only have limited data so far for what Jaissle is going to bring to Newcastle. We have what he did in the Saudi Pro League, we have what he did at Salzburg, and then we have one game to go off, the game against Valencia. And all of that is worlds apart from the Premier League, which is realistically where he's going to be tested. So what I'm going to do in this video is I'm going to focus on the things that I think I can predict with conviction. If I were a betting man, which I am, probably too much sometimes, call me Bendro Tonali. But yeah, this is the stuff that I'd be willing to put my money where my mouth is. Also, not betting advice. So what I'm not going to do here is I'm not going to put too much emphasis on that Valencia game. I think what I'm seeing a lot of is too many people seem to have taken this clean slate way too literally and seem to have forgotten everything that we know about these players before Jaissle came in. And everyone seems to almost be basing all of their expectations for this season on the one game that we've seen. Like, my casing example for this is a lot of people seem to be raving about Elanga, and like, fair enough, he had a really good first 35 minutes before obviously he was violently assaulted. But also, if we cast our minds back to last preseason, Elanga looked quite good in last preseason too. He scored a couple of goals, people got quite excited back then, and we all know how that played out. And that's not me saying like don't get excited about Elanga, that's just me saying that like I have reservations about this until I've seen a bit more from him. I do think there is all the possibility that him and Torre could really, really thrive in this kind of like fast-paced, direct counter-attacking, this like vertical football that is part of the Jaissle system. At the moment, from Elanga, I do want to see more, and Torre, he isn't Premier League proven yet. So before I go making any sort of bold claims about either of them, I want to see Torre obviously against Premier League opposition, and with Elanga, I got burnt by getting too excited about him last season, so I'm just holding back on that one a little bit. As much as he did look very lively in them first 35 minutes before being assaulted, I'm just being cautious, trying to manage expectation, because it's all well and good getting really excited about pre-season, but can these players transfer it into the Premier League? And that's what this video is going to be about. I'm going to look at what we know about some of our players already and how they might thrive within Jaissle's system and how they might fare against Premier League opposition, even if they didn't have potentially the best game against Valencia. Because as well, with regards to the Valencia game, it is worth noting that Jaissle said after the game that all the players, there was tired legs, you know, people had had double sessions all week in the heat. So I think that's sort of another reason why we can't really take too much from individual performances. Obviously, it was exciting to see how lively Torre looked. And, you know, there is certain things you can take, like how good Sean Sturr looks on the ball, for example. But I'm not going to like write any players off just because they had a bad performance against Valencia, for example. Now, having said that, I'm not going to focus too much on the performances against Valencia. I'm going to seem really contradictory in this first one, because the first player I want to talk about was essentially the man of the match of the game. I want to talk about Yoane Wissa, because I really do see a big season for Yoane Wissa, personally. Now, I may be really wrong in this. He might completely prove me wrong. But I've been thinking this for a few weeks, and I'm kind of annoyed I didn't sort of say it a little bit sooner, because it now seems really reactive off the back of his brace against Valencia. But I think Wissa is a top goal scorer in the Premier League. Obviously, that's why we paid £50 million for him. I know we were sort of ripped off a bit, considering his age and whatever else. But at the end of the day, when we signed him, he had just matched Isak's goal tally for his last season with us for non-penalty goals for that season. Like, he really is Premier League proven. At Brentford, he was lethal. For DR Congo, he's also pretty lethal. And I think if you go back over the last few years, last season does seem like the kind of exception to the rule when it comes to Yoane Wissa. And I think it's sort of no surprise that last season was the exception to the rule when you consider the lack of the preseason, the injury that he got, you know, right at the start of the season, and then sort of trying to recover from that injury for the rest of the season. Like, it's no surprise that last season was the exception to the rule. And I know you could probably make all that kind of like Premier League proven argument for Elanga as well, but Elanga's a very system-specific player. Wissa's strengths and his qualities are very much just like being a good goal scorer, being in the right place at the right time, hard-working, and like just finishing, really. And I think like these qualities that they're not system-specific, they will work in essentially any team that creates any sort of chances for him, which is not what we were last season. So yeah, I'm expecting a big season from Wissa, and I'm annoyed I didn't say it sooner because now it looks really reactive after him scoring a brace. Now, having said that, I now want to actually go into the players that I didn't think particularly had a good game, and to sort of what I was talking about at the start of the video, not putting too much emphasis on their individual performance against Valencia, and the players that I think are going to thrive in the Jaissle system, but yeah, didn't have a good game. And I sort of mentioned this briefly on the kickoff yesterday with Mr. True Geordie and Mr. Antonio Mango, but I will sort of go further into detail about this on this video, because the player that I mentioned on there was Harvey Barnes, and I want to go into more detail as to why I think he could thrive this season. Now, I'm going to preface this a little bit by saying it does come with a bit of an asterisk, because we don't know how good Toure is going to be, really. We've seen some really positive glimpses from him so far, but like we just don't know how he's going to take to the Premier League. If he hits the ground running, Harvey Barnes' minutes might be relatively limited. But if he does get the minutes, now that Gordon's gone, now that he's sort of probably considered as one of the more senior players in the squad, I'm going to explain with that why I think he could step up this season. So just to go back to it again, did Barnes play well against Valencia? No, not really at all. But I'm going to show you a few clips of Jaissle's attacking systems at his previous clubs. So you can see here, there's a lot of this like intricate, fast moving sort of give and go 1-2s. And then any sort of observant Newcastle fans that sort of pay close attention to Harvey Barnes at any point, you will know that is his game down to a T. If you haven't noticed that, then just go watch a Harvey Barnes compilation. That's essentially pretty much every single time he ever gets in a good position is by doing this sort of fast give and go 1-2, getting in between the lines. And these sort of like passages of play are quite symptomatic of Jaissle's attacking systems. So as much as Harvey Barnes might not have had the best game yesterday, I don't think it really matters. One, because it's pre-season, but two, because it's against La Liga opposition as well. And everyone, as I said, has been raving about Toure and Elanga, completely within their right to do so. But we're not playing in La Liga. We're playing in the Premier League. And the Premier League is very, very different from La Liga. Premier League opposition is stubborn opposition, low blocks, a lot of stuff coming from set pieces. To be honest, it's not the most entertaining. It's pretty fucking boring. But that's what we have in the Premier League at the moment. That's what it's become. Whether we like it or not, that's the reality. And when you're coming up against that sort of opposition, that sort of doesn't really play too well into Toure and Elanga's hands. They thrive with space to run into. And don't get me wrong, that's not me saying that they will fail every single time against a low block, because they do have pace, they can beat a man, and that can be useful against a low block. And equally, there will be times where potentially we are more underdogs this season than we have been in previous seasons, so we will be able to catch people on the counter using their pace, you know, allowing them to run into the space. And for that reason, Toure and Elanga almost definitely could thrive this season. I'm not ruling them out by any means. But what sort of excites me about Harvey Barnes is having that different profile of winger, and in a system that actually works for that profile of winger. Because it seems that within Jaissle's system, it can accommodate both, and he also is adaptable, which can accommodate both. As I said, we can play that counter-attacking style that accommodates Toure and Elanga. Also, if we do have more of the ball, it's not just going to be what we saw under Eddie Howe, which is just pass it sideways, put it out wide, and then cross the ball in. There is going to be an allowance for that intricate kind of fast-moving give-and-go 1-2 playing through the centre, which allows Harvey Barnes to tuck in a little bit, and I think he could thrive in that. And this is why I'm sort of hoping that if we do sign a right winger, it is more of the Harvey Barnes profile and less of the Elanga profile. Someone who is maybe a bit more technical, you know, potentially doesn't rely as much on their pace, but is technical, good in tight spaces, that kind of player. So yeah, I'm not saying Barnes is amazing by any stretch. He has his weaknesses, but he's just a different profile. I think a clear example of this would be like Arsenal last season. You had Trossard, who is similar to like your Harvey Barnes, and then you have Martinelli, who is similar to your Toure. And again, going back to what I said before about not just placing everything on that Valencia game, and going back to what we actually know about our players, we know Barnes has output. Regardless of, you know, whatever weaknesses you might think he has, he gets goals. And if he's playing within a system that plays to his strengths, better, I can only see that improving. And then on the same kind of thinking, I also think Voltemada will thrive. Again, not being reactive to the Valencia game, because honestly, he played fucking awful. But again, it's preseason, and I think what looked so bad about Voltemada in that game was his technical ability, which we know that isn't the case with Voltemada. That's one of his biggest strengths. And I think what looked really exciting with Voltemada is the way that he kept being found in the pocket. His touch was horrible every time, but he kept being found in that sort of central pocket. And there was players close to him where he would have been able to offload it. And if his technical ability was a bit more on point, if he'd, once he's kind of shaken that rust off a little bit, I think he will be playing really nice little intricate 1-2s and stuff. And I just think he's going to thrive with that kind of building down the centre, that kind of courageous play down the centre. I really sort of think Voltemada is going to thrive with that. I'll focus mainly on the attack there and obviously not really on the defence, just because the defence, it wasn't really what I expect to see in defence. Like, we didn't have either fullbacks playing. The one thing that I would comment on with the defence is I do think Hornicek offered so much stability and like confidence to the back line every single time they played the ball back to him. Like, even me just watching as a fan, I didn't take a deep breath every single time it was passed back to him. Like, it wasn't Nick Pope, and it was such a relief watching that. With all this said, where can we actually realistically expect Newcastle to finish this season? Now, of course, this is going to be massively affected by the business that we do for the rest of the window. I do think we'll realistically get another midfielder signed before the Liverpool game, and I kind of hope we get a right back, or at least a full back that can cover both sides. I kind of hope we do that before the Liverpool game, because currently I'm like, I don't really know who's going to play right back. It's reported that Tino isn't going to be ready for the Liverpool game, and Miley's only just returning to fitness. Can you really throw Miley in for 90 minutes when he's just returning at right back? I don't know that that's smart, so I'd like to see a fullback come in as well. But in terms of the rest of the players, and this is something again that I said on the kickoff the other day, I do think that Jaissle might hold off for any more signings after that, simply just to see what he needs once he's actually managed a game in the Premier League, because it's all well and good getting all your information, getting all your data on what you think the team needs in pre-season. But as I've said all the way throughout this video, the Premier League is a different beast. And with him having never managed in the Premier League before, with his first games being Liverpool at home and then Spurs away, and those are the only two games before the actual transfer window closes, I think them two games might be a little bit sort of experimental, where he gets a bit of data about what to expect from the Premier League, and then we might see the transfer window go right up to deadline day. I think with the circumstances that Jaissle's come into, with how long he's been given to sort of put together a Premier League campaign, I think affording him them first two games as a bit of an experiment is probably fair. And that sort of brings me back to the question of what is my expectation for the season? Like, what do I think is a fair expectation? And for me, I think the expectation for everyone really has to be a minimum of 12th. I think it's where we finished last season. And granted, we aren't juggling Champions League this season, but then we have also lost all our sort of what you would argue to be Champions League level players. The other thing I think as well is not setting our expectation too high for this season with all the chaos, with what Jaissle's kind of walked into. I think not setting the expectation too high will actually work in our favour, and maybe we could go on to do better. But I think if we set the expectation too high, I think we'll almost definitely underperform. So for me, I think like 12th is the bare minimum. I think, you'd like to see a bit of an improvement on it, but I wouldn't be aiming for anything crazy high. I think the fact that we've been written off by a lot of people works massively in our favour, and that could go on to be really beneficial and lead into a really good season. But yeah, 12th for me. Obviously, let me know in the comments what your sort of like expectation is for the season. Like, what's your sort of bare minimum? Where's do you think is the absolute maximum we could reach, and sort of where do you expect to finish? But yeah, for me, I think 12th as a bare minimum, I think is fair to not sort of pile on any crazy pressure. Obviously, a lot of what I've said in this video, we might get a bit more data on this when we play Everton this week, because then we're going to get a lot of information on how we actually do fare against Premier League opposition, how a lot of these new players, like Yoane, who hasn't played against Premier League opposition before, Jaissle is going to get a lot of information about what playing against Premier League opposition is like. So this Everton game is going to be, I think, a real eye-opener, and we're going to get a lot of information, a lot more information than we did from the Valencia game, from the Everton game. So looking forward to that. But for now, that's all the noise for this one. Until the next one.